I still vividly remember the moment when I realized there were areas on the map that they could not cover, and creatures that could not be found in biology. My name is Wyatt, and before my back started to ache, I was a construction worker. I built large, luxurious homes for the wealthy, people who only set foot there during the summer, when the building season was over, and I could no longer lift a hammer. I knew it was time to stop living by other people's terms. I decided to find a place to start over. Scouring the map, I discovered an old hunter's cabin deep in the Ozarks, far from the nearest paved road. The place was dilapidated and had been unused for years, but it had a roof and running water. It was all I needed. The surrounding forest was public land, teeming with deer, turkeys, and everything I needed to sustain myself. When I settled there, life gradually became peaceful. I learned to live off the land, hunting and foraging, and for a while, everything was fine. But about a year later, things began to change in ways I could not have imagined. One morning, when I checked the rabbit traps I had set, I discovered that they had mysteriously disappeared. The rabbit meat had been taken, and the traps were left hanging, empty. I told myself it could have been a wildcat or some other creature responsible. But in my mind, old stories I had heard as a child began to echo. Stories of creatures, walking on two legs but not human, monsters that had taken livestock, and sometimes even people. Although most people considered them legends, one late summer evening, while I was fishing in the stream just after dusk, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye on the hillside. It was taller than a deer, larger than a wolf. It moved on two legs, slightly hunched, but as fast as a startled rabbit. My heart pounded in my chest, and a primal sense of something wrong made my skin crawl. I thought it might be a black bear, and decided the best course of action was to stay away. After that event, the feeling of being watched clung to me. I often heard noises outside the cabin at night, rustling in the leaves, unlike any animal sounds I had heard before. One morning, I discovered large footprints around the cabin, the size of a dinner plate, but with only 4 toes and long claws at the front. At that point, I decided to take out my old shotgun, a large .30-06 I had used during deer season, and loaded it with heavy ammunition, capable of taking down a grizzly bear if necessary. The gun was kept near my bed, and I felt more secure with it by my side. A week later, things escalated further. On my way back from the stream, I heard a scream that sounded like a woman's, but louder and abruptly cut off, making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I ran towards the sound, raising my gun and crashing through the underbrush. When I crested the hill and saw it, I found the creature hunched over something in the forest. It resembled a human, but it was not quite right. At least 8 feet tall, with strange long limbs covered in coarse, bristly fur. Its head resembled that of a wolf, with a long snout and sharp teeth gleaming in the dim light of the remaining twilight. The creature turned and stared directly at me, its eyes glowing with a faint, ravenous light. At its feet lay Harlan, the old hermit who lived a few miles away. He was torn apart like thin paper, and the creature kept staring at me, saliva dripping from its fangs. I fired a shot, aiming for the center of its body, and the gun's blast made my shoulder jolt. For a moment, I thought I had hit it. The creature staggered back with a growl that made the trees shake, but then it lunged forward, moving faster than anything of that size should be able to, disappearing into the brush with eerie agility. I fired a few more shots, but the forest was too dense, and all I could hear was the creature rushing away, followed by silence. The creature didn't return that night, but I knew it would come back. Now it knew where I was. Didn't sleep. I sat huddled by the fire in the cabin, the gun resting in my lap, eyes fixed on the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every hoot of an owl made me jump. The next morning, I decided to pack up and only take what I needed. I left everything else behind. I found Harlan's truck, broke the lock just like I used to do back in the less honest days, and drove until I reached a main road. I never went back. Eventually, Harlan's body was found. Authorities concluded it was a bear attack, a rare accident. Maybe they were right. I never told anyone what I really saw that day. But I still keep that gun, though now it lies under my bed, even while I live in a house in town. You never know when something from out there might come looking for you. Last month, The news reported a story about some campers who went missing deep in the Ozarks. No traces were found, just a devastated campsite. There's speculation it could be a mountain lion or a lost bear. But I read between the lines and saw something else. Footprints with long claws, the whispers of a tall, strange creature in the woods. Sometimes I swear I can still smell that damp, musty stench of the creature and hear its hungry growl echoing in my mind. Still out there, whatever it is, lurking in the darkness where the wilderness still stretches on. It makes you wonder what else might be hiding out there. Things that maps don't show. Things people call Bigfoot or Wendigo or whatever name humans use to describe the nameless monsters with golden eyes. Makes you wish you'd stayed in the world of tools and blueprints, where monsters can't reach you. I live with this fear, and on quiet nights, I still feel the mysterious shadows of the Ozarks clinging to me, preventing me from getting a peaceful sleep. Feels like I'm constantly being watched by something I can't understand, and every time I hear a strange sound, old fear rises again. I can't escape those memories, and even though I've left the Ozarks, I know those creatures are still there, lurking in the shadows of the forest. July 16, 1991, started like any other summer day in the mountains. My name is Zeke, and I'm the caretaker of an old fire lookout tower nestled in the Bitterroot Range of Montana. The job is remote and low-paying, but I didn't need much more than a roof over my head, a bed to sleep in, and the stunning view of sunrises that painted the world in radiant gold, and sunsets that blazed like fire. Those moments were worth more than any paycheck in my book. I'd been working there for about 3 years. The solitude suited me, especially after the troubles and heartache I left behind in the city. Bad job, and even worse relationship, kind of problems that follow a person even into their dreams. I thought the wilderness would heal my wounds, and for the most part, it did. However, that afternoon brought with it an unusual feeling. I received a radio call from headquarters, informing me that a severe storm was on its way. They needed confirmation that I had secured the tower. This was standard procedure during bad weather, as these old towers weren't exactly fortresses. They were more like wooden cabins perched on stilts, offering a 360-degree view of the world, all the lightning it attracted. But I had survived plenty of storms without incident. I told my boss that the tower was secured and confidently assured myself that I would make it through this one too. I spent the next hour gathering firewood and checking the windows. The wind began to howl, pushing the tower so that it creaked. Rain pounded against the glass like solid fists. For the first time, I felt a twinge of unease. Not fear exactly, just a disturbance in the air. Then the radio crackled. This time, it wasn't the voice of the dispatcher, but Jess Ranger from the neighboring area. Her voice, raspy and full of panic, called out to me. "Zeke," she said, her voice barely a whisper over the static. "There's something here, something in the trees." Then the signal cut off, replaced by the high-pitched whine of white noise that made my teeth rattle. I tried calling her back, but there was only silence. My unease had now turned into full-blown fear. Jess was tough. She wasn't easily scared. Whatever she had seen, it had to be something very bad. I decided I would hunker down until morning, then go to her area to find her. Storm or not, that night felt endless. The wind howled like a pack of hungry wolves trying to tear through the walls. The lookout tower swayed and groaned. Thunder boomed so loud it drowned out the rhythm of my heartbeat. Around midnight, the rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and an eerie silence settled over the forest. That's when I heard it, a scratching sound on the metal ladder leading up to the lookout platform. At first, it was faint, but it grew louder, like claws scraping against steel. My heart pounded like a desperate prisoner. I swallowed the lump in my throat and grabbed the shotgun I kept under the bed, every instinct in me screaming to hide, pretend I wasn't there. But if it was Jess, injured and lost in the storm, he needed help. I crept to the window, risking a glance outside. The moonlight pierced through the clouds beneath the tower, casting shadows on the ladder. It wasn't a woman. It was a grotesque figure, as large as two men stacked together, its shoulders hunched in a way that wasn't human. Its head was massive and round, and its eyes, yellow like a lake reflecting the moon, gleamed with a predatory intelligence. The creature climbed the platform slowly and deliberately, covered in thick, dark fur soaked from the storm, and it smelled like rotting flesh. From my hiding place I watched, shotgun raised, feeling sweat trickle down my back. The creature couldn't see me from here, but if it got inside, it was already at the door of the tower, scratching at the wood like a dog trying to get in. Then it started making sounds. Not words, but a jumble of noises. Growls, screams, and something cold that sounded like laughter. Each sound echoed through the small room of the tower, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then it mimicked Jess's voice. Zeke called, perfect malicious imitation. Open the door, let me in. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some mindless animal. It was, I have no words to describe it, a nightmare wrapped in fur and fangs. I closed my eyes trying to block out the sound, but it kept calling my name, the scratching and mocking lasting through the night. The creature never gave up, never letting me rest. Many times I was tempted to open the door and end it all with a single shot to its monstrous face, and then face whatever came next. But cowardice, or perhaps a glimmer of desperate hope, kept my hand on the gun and my body away from the door. When dawn came, the scratching finally stopped. I cautiously opened the door. Just a crack. The platform was empty, but dark blood stains and long scratch marks on the metal showed that last night had not been a hallucination. I didn't need my boss to tell me to evacuate. I packed the essentials, locked up the tower, and started down the mountain. I guessed that whatever it was, it would soon find me. My only chance was to make it to the highway. I had to flag down someone, anyone who could take me back to civilization. The journey down the mountain wasn't easy. The dirt path had turned slick from the storm, and every step was a battle. I felt as though I was being watched. A feeling I couldn't shake. I felt as though I was being watched. A feeling I couldn't shake. At times, when I heard strange noises in the distance, I had to stop and hold my breath. Listening, the ghosts of last night's nightmares seemed to materialize, dancing in the corners of my eyes. The wild plants and trees seemed to reach out, trying to hold me back, like the malicious hands of the storm. Finally, after 2 days of constant movement, I emerged from the forest and found a dirt road leading to a small town. I collapsed to my knees, tears welling in my eyes. It was a kind gesture. He stopped and gave me a ride into town. He looked at me with a strange expression, as if he couldn't quite comprehend the state of panic I was in. When I arrived at the hospital, the medical team and investigating officers asked me countless questions. I told them everything I had experienced, but what I said seemed like mere noise in the air. The police went to the lookout tower area, but found nothing except traces of the storm and wind. They concluded that I had been swept up in anxiety and loneliness. The doctors helped me recover my health and advised me never to return to the lookout tower. It's been 20 years since that day. I never returned to the tower. The nightmares never completely disappeared. They still lurk in the shadows of my mind, never giving me complete peace. I live my life in the safety of the world tamed by humans, hoping that the nightmares never come back. Every time the wind blows, every time night falls, I can still feel the presence of something deep in the woods, something I can't understand, something I can't fully conquer. And every night, as darkness descends, I can't help but wonder if it's out there somewhere, ready to strike again. On September 4th, 2010, the faint light of morning stretched across the cabin window, and I began my day like any other, tending to the chickens, watering the plants, and checking the garden. Life in the Appalachian Mountains, where I had retreated to escape the noise of Washington, D.C., had once been my dream. But now, as the dawn light filtered through the branches, I felt this peace as nothing more than a thin shell, unable to mask the loneliness and tension building up inside. In recent months, the silence had become overwhelming. At times, I talked to the chickens, as if they were real friends. But that day, when I placed my hand on the radio and listened to fiery sermons about hellfire and brimstone, I couldn't help but feel something was off. The sound only deepened my sense of isolation within the heavy silence of this place. As the afternoon came, I decided to head out, searching for somewhere I could relieve the suffocating feeling. Along with my dog Rusty, I left the cabin and followed a trail to a small stream where I hoped to wash away my fatigue. Hot and dry weather wasn't ideal, but at least the stream could cool me down. However, what I found when I approached the stream was a gruesome sight. A deer carcass lay half buried in the underbrush, its bones exposed under the harsh sunlight. Vultures circled above, like vague shadows, lazily circling the overwhelming stench of decay from the carcass. There were no signs of a typical scavenging by wolves or other predators. The silence of the forest, coupled with the carcass, signaled something inexplicable. I felt as though something was watching me. The tracks left on the ground belonged to a massive creature, with claws nearly the size of my dinner plate, shaped strangely like triangles. Each step I followed sent a chill down my spine, as if the hand of death was brushing against me. The old stories I had heard about the mythical creatures of these mountains suddenly became terrifyingly real and vivid. When I returned to the cabin, fear consumed me, and I began to tightly lock the chicken coop, even though I knew that if the creature wanted to, it could easily tear everything apart. I oiled the rifle I hadn't used in years. The sense of dread made me more anxious than ever. Night fell, and the moonlight streamed through the cabin window, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Every creak of the cabin felt like a reminder of the insecurity. I couldn't sleep, and as the night dragged on, tension only intensified. The next morning it rained, and the heavy downpour turned the dirt road leading to my cabin into a muddy mess. I knew this was my chance to cover the tracks, but it was also the opportunity to prepare for a possible confrontation. I spent the entire day planning and preparing for the worst-case scenario. I began packing, stuffing everything I could into a duffel bag, and prepping the old truck, my every move infused with panic and anxiety. Rusty, with his sorrowful eyes, sat by the window, as if sensing the rising tension. Just as the daylight began to fade, I was ready to leave, only to discover that Rusty was no longer by my side. "Rusty!" I shouted, but there was no response. My panic surged when I saw him standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. I rushed over, calling his name, but it was too late. A blurry shape lunged toward us, too fast and too strong for me to react. The creature grabbed Rusty, and in a flurry of fur and blood, retreated deep into the shadows. A horrifying roar echoed through the forest, making me feel as if an earthquake had struck. I scrambled back to the truck, fumbling with the keys I could barely see. The truck roared to life with a terrible cough, and I slammed it into gear, speeding into the dark night, the headlights cutting through the thick gloom. As I fled, I caught a glimpse of the creature retreating into the woods with my dog in its jaws, and I knew Rusty hadn't survived. I continued to drive along the slippery road, the drenched forest and dense fog forming a surreal, nightmarish scene. Every sound, every gust of wind put me on edge. Stopping at a gas station, the weak light from the sign reflected the exhaustion on my face. I didn't know where I would go next. The decision was clear. I never wanted to return to this place. Rusty's death was a clear warning that I had trespassed into a land that should never be disturbed. Even as I drove away, the terror and fear clung to me. Throughout the journey, all I could think about was getting as far away as possible. Though I had no idea where safety could be, as the place I once called home had become an inescapable hell. I could feel the tires spinning in the mud as I floored the gas, barreling down the muddy road. I always hated the jolt and shake of the old truck, fearing it would throw me into a ditch. Branches slapped against the windshield, the rain still pouring down, but all I could see were Rusty's trusting eyes. I could hear his terrified cry echoing from afar. The nearest town was 2 hours away in ideal conditions, but not tonight. I sped onto the main road, my heart racing, muttering desperate prayers under my breath. Maybe I could outrun it. Maybe it wouldn't pursue me. Such naive hope, the kind that gets people killed in these woods. Then I saw them in the rearview mirror, those gleaming eyes, darting between the trees with unbelievable speed, effortlessly keeping pace. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, the engine roaring in protest. My old truck wasn't built for this. It shook violently, but the lights in the mirror kept closing in. The creature wasn't playing anymore. It burst from the trees, crossing the road in one giant leap. I slammed the brakes, tires screeching as the truck skidded out of control. I clutched the steering wheel, my heart lodged in my throat, as the creature landed on the roof. Metal shrieked and buckled, its knife-like claws piercing through the windshield, sending shards of glass flying into my face. I saw its face almost inches from mine, grotesque and distorted, all teeth and snout, glowing red eyes filled with a hunger that seemed to stretch back for centuries. I screamed, leaning back as a massive hand smashed through the driver's side window. Truck veered off the road, crashing through a fence and tumbling down a hillside. Each impact sent searing pain through every part of my body. I lost all sense of direction as the world spun into a chaotic blend of shattered glass and torn metal, then a welcome darkness. When I woke up, I gasped for air in the muddy ground, rain still pouring down on me. I didn't know how long I had been unconscious. My head throbbed, and I felt the warm trickle of blood down my arm. The truck lay mangled below, its headlights casting weak beams through the mist, and outside, those eyes were still watching, circling like a wounded predator sizing up its prey. The rain might have thrown it off temporarily, but dawn wasn't far away. I had to move. Couldn't feel my legs, but I forced myself to crawl, each painful inch leaving a red streak in the mud. The creature let me go, stalking around with a terrible growl rumbling from its chest. It was toying with me, I knew that. I found shelter in a drainage ditch, squeezing myself in with a burst of desperate energy. I fumbled for my small folding knife. It was the only weapon I had left. Rusty's collar, broken and blood-stained, was still in my pocket. I clutched it tightly, holding back sobs, a mixture of pain and rage boiling inside me. Creature didn't leave. I could hear it scratching, its low whining, as if frustrated by my futile resistance. It would wait for me to tire. All I had was time slipping away like sand in an hourglass. Dawn would bring light, and that meant people, right? Someone had to pass through on this road. Notice the wrecked truck. Was it a small flicker of hope or the delusion of a dying person? I couldn't tell anymore. There was movement outside, a rustling, then another sound, a human voice. Salvation or just more prey? I gripped my small knife, knowing it was useless, but it was all I had left. "Hello," a cautious female voice called out. "Is anyone in there?" I tried to scream, but my voice came out as a ragged, broken rasp. Then footsteps splashing through the water drew nearer, the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. In that light, I saw the creature rise, towering much taller than I remembered, easily twice the size of a bear, its fur matted with mud and blood. But what terrified me most was how it moved. Not on all fours like an animal, but upright on powerful legs, its long arms nearly touching the ground. The flashlight bearers, likely two park rangers, didn't have time to realize what was happening. They screamed, short, sharp cries, cut off with a grotesque finality. I heard bones crunch, wet, tearing sounds. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. When the creature turned back toward the culvert, it looked different, satisfied, almost smug. It wasn't in a hurry anymore. It moved leisurely toward me, its glowing eyes filled with the satisfaction of a predator, chilling me more than the rain. Everything inside me wanted to scream, fight, go out with what little dignity I had left. But what would it matter? It would find savage delight in my resistance. I saw it in the creature's grotesque tilt of its head. I sobbed, my hands trembling over the useless knife. It crouched at the entrance of the culvert, its hot, rancid breath filling the space around me. Then it did something unexpected. It threw something at my feet and withdrew into the shadows. The flashlight fell beside me, still shining, and next to it was Rusty's collar. Chewed and blood-stained, its small tag with his name a cruel mockery. The creature retreated into the darkness, leaving me trembling in the rain. I clutched the collar and cried until there were no more tears left. The rescue team found me a few hours later, mumbling on the verge of hypothermia. All they saw was a wrecked truck, 2 shredded corpses, and 1 shocked survivor. My story about the monster made them smile gently and give me a sedative. That was the beginning of everything that followed. The worst part was that they classified it as an animal attack, possibly a bear or a wild mountain lion. They thought I had passed out and imagined the rest under the influence of trauma. The city papers reported the tragedy. People in the cafe whispered about crazed hermits and the dangers of the wilderness, and meanwhile, I knew the truth. I could still feel its breath on my face, hear its growl echo in my nightmares. I'm hiding out in a filthy motel room, cheap whiskey as my only companion, I can't go back. Ever. Every time I close my eyes, I see Rusty. His innocent eyes and his absolute trust in me. And then that horrifying image appears, the grotesque creature with a mouthful of sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. The memories replay every second, haunting me like an unending nightmare. Its savage laughter, the cruel playfulness as it tossed Rusty's collar back at me like a challenge. It didn't just want to kill me, it wanted me to live in fear, tormented by what I couldn't save. I try to forget, but I can't. Every night, I wake up in chaos. The sound of rain tapping against the window sends me into panic. And each gust of wind outside feels like the creature's whispers, waiting for the perfect moment to return. The suffocating feeling rises, forcing me to get up, run outside, and crouch beneath the dim light of the nearby gas station. No one understands what I've been through. Passers-by glance at me with pity, thinking I'm just a crazed lunatic driven mad by too much time in the wilderness. They don't know. No one knows. Only me and that creature, the one that's still out there. Sometimes I think about running far away to a place where these forests could never reach. But I know, wherever I go, it will find me. There's something connecting me to it. An unbreakable bond, like an invisible string pulling me back to the start of this nightmare. Can't hide forever. Many nights I've sat there, staring at the phone, wanting to call the police, someone, anyone, but I always give up. Who would believe me? Who would understand the terror I've been through? The rain keeps falling, each drop a reminder that the creature is still out there, waiting for the right moment. I know that one day it will return, and this time there will be no mercy. One night, I heard something moving around the cabin. Heavy footsteps, a strange snorting sound. I had left the loaded rifle by the bed, and the moonlight streamed through the gap in the curtain. When I looked outside, I saw a huge head peering in through the window. Its head was enormous, with long limbs, thick black fur, and pale yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. I couldn't even scream from fear. The sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up as it disappeared into the canopy. The next morning, I went outside and saw gigantic claw marks on the cabin walls. At that moment, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. There was something out there, a real danger, but what was it? Fear engulfed me. I tried to reinforce the windows and doors, keeping Alice inside, which led to many arguments and tears. I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. I needed to find a way to protect us. I began digging traps around the property, setting up sharp stakes like in the wilderness movies. I even rigged a crude alarm system using tripwires and old tin cans. Though simple, I thought having some kind of warning was better than nothing. The creature seemed very intelligent. It would test me, circling the cabin at night, destroying the traps, but never setting them off correctly. I felt like it was toying with me, like a cat playing with a mouse. Its weight was the worst part, not knowing when it would decide to attack. On a Tuesday morning, the worst happened. I was outside gathering firewood when the alarm went off, with breaking noises and clanging metal echoing. I grabbed the rifle and ran quickly towards the cabin. The creature was much larger than I had imagined, standing easily 7 feet tall, with tough scaled skin and bulging muscles. Its face was hard to describe, like a dog's face stretched out of shape, with an elongated snout, razor-sharp teeth, and eyes glowing red like burning coals. Alice was screaming inside the cabin. The creature tore through the flimsy door as if it were just cardboard and charged inside. The imminent death made me panic. I raised the rifle, but my hands were trembling. I had never been a hunter, and I had barely used the gun. The creature roared, shaking the ground, and charged at me. I fired one shot, then another. The bullets hit it, but seemed to have no effect. It continued advancing, the ground trembling under its massive footsteps. I fumbled for the next round. The gun jammed. In desperation, I raised the gun like a club. The creature slammed into me like a freight train, throwing me away. Air seemed to be sucked out of my lungs as I crashed into a tree, sharp pain erupting through my body. I dropped the gun, staggered to my feet, my vision blurred. The creature was coming closer, its deep growls resonating in its chest. Its mouth was open, drool dripping, and I could smell the stench of decaying flesh from its breath. My legs ached, but I forced them to move. I stumbled and ran toward the forest. Creature hot on my heels, running like I had never run before, driven solely by fear. I could hear the creature crashing through the bushes behind me, breath wheezing. I stumbled over a root, my face slamming into the ground. The creature was getting closer, and I struggled to get up. Then I saw it. The old creek cut through a 30-foot cliff, with the water rushing violently below. A desperate thought flashed through my mind as I staggered to my feet and limped toward the creek's edge. Behind me, the roar echoed, and the sound of crunching leaves grew louder. I leaped down. The world blurred with greens and browns, and then there was a powerful impact as I hit the water. The strong currents swept me away, and all I could see were crashing waves and the sensation of being pummeled by the water. I drifted downwards, my head spinning. Then, everything went silent. When I woke up, I found myself in a small house. An elderly couple stood beside me, looking at me with concern. They had found me washed up on the shore, weak and injured. Both they and I knew that I couldn't return to that house. I needed to escape and start anew. Alice was still missing. Searchers couldn't find any trace of her. I couldn't go back to the property, although I desperately wanted to find her. My own survival and the remaining days of my life mattered more. My spirit was shattered, and I knew I would have to live with this torment for the rest of my life. The memories of Alice, the creature, and the unending battle would forever haunt my mind. February 21st, 2003, came an unforgettable day in my life. People around me criticized my decision to buy the old hunting lodge located in the remote forest. They said it was a foolish move, meant only for the young. But perhaps I was trying to prove something to myself. My name is Walter Gibson, a retired engineer who spent his life hunched over blueprints and spreadsheets. I thought I deserved a long period to enjoy the silence and solitude before leaving this world. The hunting lodge was beautiful, with its rough timber and a massive stone fireplace sitting quietly beside a clear blue lake, miles away from the nearest town, with no cell phone signal. It was the perfect place for me to seek peace. First few weeks were truly a paradise. I walked the trails, fished for dinner, and listened to the calls of diving birds at dusk. Even the winter snowstorms couldn't make me leave. I had stocked up on wood for the fire and was prepared for a long stay. But then, late at night, I began hearing strange sounds, cracking of ice, deep rumbling noises as if an invisible force was roaring across the lake, making my teeth chatter. At first, I thought it was just sudden temperature changes. When daylight came, there were no signs of anything unusual. However, rumors began to spread at the general store in town. The shopkeeper, Jed, looked at me with a suspicious eye as I bought supplies. "You're staying in the old McDowell place, aren't you?" he asked. I nodded, confirming that I was. He growled, "They say it's haunted." He spat on the floor to emphasize, "There's an angry spirit there. They say it doesn't like intruders." I laughed it off, paid, and left the store, thinking it was just local folklore. But as I drove back to the lake, a feeling of unease began to settle in. Back at the house, I sensed that something was off. Strange, inexplicable noises, footsteps in the attic when I was sure I was alone, whispers of the wind that didn't stir the leaves. And on the nights when the ice cracked the loudest, I swore I saw a huge shadow flash across the frozen lake, massive and grotesque, only to vanish in an instant. I started feeling uneasy, and to be safe, I kept a pistol under my pillow, the only memento from my military days. I told myself the gun was for protection against bears or stray wolves, but I wasn't entirely reassured. One snowy morning, I went outside to gather more wood and found the shed door ripped from its hinges, tools scattered on the snow, and giant footprints crushing the snow. They didn't resemble any footprints I'd ever seen, too wide for a bear, with long, claw-like toes. Panic surged within me, but I tried to keep it in check. I didn't want a ghost story to scare me. I reinforced the defenses, locked the downstairs windows, and kept the lights on all night. Still, the feeling of being watched never left me. I managed to stay another 2 weeks. Then one night, I woke up in a panic, smoke thick and foul filling my bedroom. I stumbled to the window, heart racing, and saw the shed burning, casting enormous dancing shadows. And then, I saw it standing at the edge of the clearing. The creature was colossal, at least 8 feet tall. Its body was gaunt, hunched over, covered in coarse striped fur. Its head was a grotesque wolf skeleton, elongated and distorted, but its eyes were skewed, glowing amber in the firelight. I fumbled for my gun and fired a shot through the window, more out of desperation than strategy. The creature didn't blink. It let out a piercing howl, cutting through the night and locking its bright eyes on me. That moment, I knew it wasn't a spirit. It was flesh and blood, and it was hungry. I fled immediately. Grabbing my emergency-prepared backpack, I bolted into the woods. I didn't dare look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until I tripped and tumbled down a ravine, until I could no longer feel my legs. I lay there, trembling, as the dawn light crept through the branches. When I finally mustered the courage to move, crawled up the road, half crawling, half walking towards town. Jed didn't even seem surprised when I stumbled into the store, eyes wide and babbling about a monster. He made me a strong drink and called the sheriff. When the deputies arrived, all they found at the house were the charred remains of the shed and giant, unidentified footprints in the snow. The sheriff looked at me with pity, muttering something about stressed-out recluses and vivid imaginations. No one believed me. I didn't bother trying to convince them, packed up my belongings, left town that same day, and never returned. Some might call me a coward. Maybe they're right, but I saw what I saw. I learned the hard way that there are parts of this world that are not covered by maps, things lurking in the darkness beyond the light of the fire. The locals know this. They call the creature a skinwalker, a wendigo, or something else. But that doesn't change the fact that it's still out there. Maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting for me. This happened to me on October 6, 2009. My marriage had deteriorated, a deep crack in an old wall, irreparable. The city, once a place where I found success and excitement, had now become a choking collar, making me feel suffocated. To free myself from that oppression, I decided to buy a cheap trailer, place it on a small, secluded plot of land in the Ozarks, where I hoped that a change of scenery might help heal the wounds in my soul. My name is Everett Barnes. First summer here was like a paradise I had never imagined. I taught myself to repair my little house, planted lush vegetable patches, and took pleasure in tending to the squirrels in the dense forest. The absolute quiet, along with the vastness of the forest, made my problems and sorrows feel diminished, like stray specks of dust in the vast expanse. Then winter came, and the Ozark Hills became merciless. Cold didn't just touch the skin, it seeped into the bones. I started frequently visiting the town's general store just to seek some human interaction. Although the locals were friendly, they were also wary of strangers. Their eyes followed me as I moved through the aisles, and conversations often ceased when I walked in. That's when I first heard about Zeke, recluse. They said Zeke lived deep in the woods, and no one had seen him in town for years. Some speculated he was a Vietnam War veteran who had become wild from the horrors he witnessed. Others believed he was an ancient spirit, a sort of guardian deity tied to the land. I didn't pay much attention to these stories until one February afternoon, when I went out to check my traps. I found the carcass of a deer, half buried in the thick snow. It wasn't like any deer I had ever seen. Its flesh was torn apart, hanging in tatters, and there was a strange, foul odor in the air, like decay mingled with something moldy and rank. Other carcasses appeared scattered through the forest, always deer, and all were ravaged in an inexplicable manner. Tension and unease began to engulf the town, lingering in the air like an unpleasant undertow. Zeke became a topic of discussion, with stories about flickering lights in the woods and unearthly howls in the dead of night. Fear began to infiltrate my mind. One morning, when I woke up, I discovered that my dog, Patches, was missing. She was a tough mixed-breed dog, not afraid of anything. The tracks behind my trailer told a horrific story. Fierce struggle, blood splattered on the snow, and dragged footprints leading into the forest. These tracks were not like those of a bear. They were massive. Something was off. The tracks changed, sometimes moving on all fours, sometimes standing on two legs, with longer paw pads and sharper claws. Fear and fury surged within me like a wild wave. I grabbed my rifle and followed the tracks deep into the forest, the only sound being the crunch of snow under my boots. The air grew heavier, the stench increasingly pungent. And then I saw it, just a fleeting shadow at first, through the trees, a gigantic hunched shape retreating into the underbrush. Patches was gone, with only her collar snagged on a branch. I knelt in the snow, heart racing, trying to process what I had seen. The creature moved with an unimaginable speed. Its fur was coarse and mottled. Its head was too long, too narrow for any bear. Rumors spread through town like wildfire. A hunting party was organized, with men armed to the teeth. They invited me to join them, but a primal fear had taken hold of me. I watched them leave, their gun lights fading, and I knew deep down that this was a futile mission. That night, the creature came for me. I had locked myself inside the trailer, bolting the windows and leaving the loaded rifle propped against the door. First sound was scratching outside, like claws scraping against the thin walls. Then came the growls, low and guttural, circling my makeshift fortress. The trailer shook as the creature threw its full weight against it. Repeatedly, the jarring impacts made every bone in my body ache. The hours of torture dragged on, my mind swirling in a panicked combination of rage and sheer terror. I imagined the creature outside, its massive form, its foul breath, its eyes burning with predatory hunger. Just when I thought the trailer would collapse, the attack stopped. Silence enveloped, but I dared not look outside. I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I huddled on the floor, the rifle trembling in my hand, waiting. Dawn brought a horrific sight. The ground outside was marked by the creature's enormous footprints. Blood was splattered on the steps, but I couldn't tell if it was Patches's or the creature's. I knew then that it was over. My sanctuary had been tainted, forest poisoned. With a heavy heart, I abandoned the trailer and left the Ozarks, never to return. City life now seemed bearable, with its noise and crowds. Better to be surrounded by the indifference of strangers than by the ravenous attention of something invisible. I sleep with the lights on, a habit I can't shake. I looked up and noticed dark clouds swirling from the horizon. A major storm was approaching. Within minutes, rain began pouring down as if the sky had burst open. The heavy raindrops fell like bullets from the sky, drenching me within seconds. I knew I was in danger. The metal surveying pole in my hand could make me a perfect lightning target at any moment. I needed to find shelter immediately. I hurriedly searched around, and after wading through mud and rain, I discovered a small cave hidden in a nearby rock face. It wasn't exactly a large cave, just a rock alcove large enough for me to crawl into. With few options, I decided to use it as a temporary refuge. I crawled inside, huddled up, and tried to keep my equipment from getting damaged by the rain. Once settled, I noticed something very strange. The cave floor was completely clean, no dry leaves, no dirt, as if someone had swept the place. This was highly unusual, but at that moment, I was too exhausted and cold to be concerned. I thought perhaps an animal had used the cave as a shelter and didn't think much more of it. However, there was something else that caught my attention even more. A foul, repugnant odor began to seep into the small space of the cave, assaulting my nose. It wasn't the kind of smell you usually encounter in the forest, not the scent of decaying leaves or damp earth, but a terrible stench like rotting meat left out under the sun for too long. The odor had a strangely sweet undertone that made my stomach churn and nausea rise. In that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. My survival instincts warned me that I shouldn't be there. I drew my flashlight from my belt, shining the light deeper into the cave, ready to confront any creature that might be taking shelter there. And then, my flashlight illuminated something I could never have anticipated. It was neither a bear nor any animal I had ever known. Deep within the cave, I saw a creature, the only word I could think of at the time. It stood at least 2.5 meters tall, with a gaunt, hunched body. Its skin was stretched tight over exposed bones, resembling the hide of a reanimated corpse. It had no fur, its gray-brown skin looking like old, rough, and scaly leather. But what horrified me most was its head. Huge like a basketball, with an unusually long snout. On top of its head were 2 broken horns, looking as though they had been snapped long ago. But the eyes were truly terrifying. 2 deep, hollow black sockets with no light, as if they could swallow the entire world. I felt as if they were staring right through me, into the depths of my soul. Before I could react, the creature emitted a piercing screech that echoed throughout the cave. I jumped back, stumbling over my equipment. The noise seemed to enrage the creature. It charged toward me with astonishing speed, completely at odds with its bulky form. Panicked, I struggled to get up and flee the cave. I heard its claws scraping against the rock behind me. Fortunately, it didn't pursue. Perhaps the sunlight frightened it? Or maybe it was a cave-dwelling creature, couldn't tolerate the light. I didn't stop, running straight out into the rain, my heart pounding wildly. The rain was still heavy, but I didn't care. I thought the landowner could find someone else to complete the job. I made my way back to my truck, driving frantically until I found a roadside diner with a payphone. I called the Forest Service and told them everything I had seen. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy. The ranger on the line didn't mock me. He said they had received reports of similar sightings in the area, though only occasionally. He also mentioned that the creature wouldn't bother me if I stayed away from that area. Added that the caves in the Gila region were ancient, with many unexplored passages, and that there could be something living there, nightmarish entities never before seen. I never went back to complete that survey. Some things aren't worth risking your life for. I left the county a few months later, finding work elsewhere, but sometimes at night, I dream of claws scraping against the rocks, and I wake up in a cold sweat, smelling that rotting meat. The locals have given the creature I saw a name. They call it the Goat Man. I suppose it's the most fitting name. One thing I know, there are places in the wilderness, forgotten and untouched, where the rules of our world no longer apply. Sometimes ancient stories whispered around the campfire contain a kernel of truth, and that is a truth best left alone. Now, I always check the mirrors when I get out of my truck, even in broad daylight, seeing every movement flicker among the trees like a loping shape. I would never return to those forests alone. You might think that makes me a coward, or that I've lost my courage. Truth is simpler. Some things, once you see them, make you understand that we are not at the top of the food chain, not everywhere, not always. September 3rd, 1991. I used to think that living here meant I'd never have a bad day like I did in the office. But it turns out I was wrong. Very wrong. My name is Rick. I've spent years training people to survive any hell on this planet. But now, I'm the one who needs a survival course, after reporting on Thompson. There's nothing left to do. Wait. The sun is setting, with no sign of the sheriff. I decided to secure the cabin for the night. I patched up the roof, checked the firewood, familiar tasks, but I felt uneasy in my gut, as if I was waiting for something to jump out from the darkness. I took out my rifle, cleaned it, and made sure it was ready. It's not the usual routine here. As night falls, the forest has a different kind of silence. Not a peaceful quiet, but a stillness as if something is holding its breath. I kept the fire in the small pit. I didn't even try to sleep. Around 3 in the morning I heard it, not the snapping of branches, nor the rustling of leaves. You usually hear from animals. It was like a creaking, heavy and tense, like an old tree being bent too far. Whatever was making that sound was enormous. Put out the fire, using my foot to kick dirt over the embers. I didn't want any light revealing my position. Then, silence. I stared into the darkness, rifle ready. The minutes dragged on interminably. My heart pounded so hard I swore anything out there could hear it. Then I saw a slight movement at the tree line. Not the small motion of an animal. This thing was tall. I could see its silhouette against the faint moonlight, and it wasn't a shape I was familiar with. Not a bear, not a moose. It stood on 2 legs, but its limbs were long, curved in a way that sent chills down my spine. It tilted its head like a bird trying to see better. I stood still, hardly breathing. It took another step, then another, accompanied by that creaking sound. It wasn't branches breaking, but its joints shifting. And from that silhouette I began to see details. A gaunt, twisted body, arms long past the knees, and a head that seemed elongated. The damn thing came close enough for me to smell it. A mixture of rot and wet fur. It let out a faint, raspy hiss that made me grit my teeth. Then it vanished, quickly retreating into the foliage. I waited until dawn to move. My hands were still gripping the rifle tightly. As the day broke, I swept the surrounding area for tracks. No bear or wolf. They looked like long, clawed hands, and whatever made those tracks was massive. The impressions were deeply sunk into the ground. I followed the tracks. They led directly to where I found the remains of Thompson. This monster hadn't just passed through. This was its hunting ground, and I was the next target. The following days were a chaotic mix of exhaustion and terror. I barely slept, jolting awake at every sound. I only hunted when absolutely necessary, moving carefully and leaving as few traces as possible. The creature, because I didn't know what else to call it, seemed to be toying with me. I found torn pieces of fabric in strange places, glimpsed it out of the corner of my eye, and its stench always lingered in the air, constant reminder that it was lurking. Then came a turning point. While tracking a deer, trying to stock up on food, I heard a scream that shattered the silence. A human scream. Someone else was here, possibly about to become the monster's next meal. I dashed off, rifle in hand, heart pounding. I found her at the edge of a clearing, a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She was backed up against a tree, sobbing as the monster circled her. The grotesque creature seemed to be playing with its prey. I didn't think much, just acted, aimed the rifle, and fired a shot. The shot was merely a warning. The monster whipped around, hissing and growling. It resembled a beast more than a human. Running on all fours, its eyes glowing a strange yellow in the twilight. The girl, who later told me her name was Sarah, ran while I drew the creature's attention. We sprinted deep into the forest, not caring where we were going, only trying to get away. Fired another shot, hitting the creature in the shoulder. It screamed, an inhuman sound that sent chills down my spine. Sarah and I ran for what felt like hours, finally collapsing, exhausted and drained. We spent the night in fear, whispering stories and trying to stifle our sobs. When the sun rose, we made a plan. It was a desperate plan, but our only chance. We made our way to a high point, a rocky outcrop overlooking much of the forest. The monster's tracks had vanished, but we knew it was still out there. Our plan was for me to act as bait, drawing it into position so Sarah could shoot accurately from the outcrop. It was a suicide mission, but the alternative was even worse. I moved through the forest, making noise and leaving clear tracks behind me. When I reached a clearing, I waited. It didn't take long for the creaking sound to echo across the open space, and the monster stepped into view. It stalked, its eyes fixed on me. Sarah's rifle fired. The bullet hit the monster, causing it to stagger, one of its clawed hands clutching its chest. I held my breath, waiting for it to fall, but it didn't. It turned its long head to look up at the outcrop where Sarah was standing. Growled. Charge. Sarah fired continuously. Each shot made it stagger, but it kept advancing. It reached the base of the rock and began climbing. Its movements were frighteningly agile. I watched in despair as Sarah backed away, her face pale. She fired the final shot, and the monster fell, crashing onto the rocks. It lay still for only a few seconds. With a roar that shook the ground, it stood up, bloodied but unbroken. "Rick, run!" Sarah's voice, barely audible, rang out in desperation. I didn't need any more prompting. I ran as if hell itself was chasing me, dodging trees and leaping over fallen logs. Behind me, I could hear the monster crashing through the underbrush, its furious roars echoing through the forest. I didn't know how long I had been running or where I had gone. Eventually, I collapsed, gasping for breath. I heard Sarah's voice faintly in the distance, but I couldn't respond. My mind spun as everything faded into darkness. I woke up with a vague sense of disorientation, surrounded by dense foliage. The aching in my body was undeniable. Worse was the persistent fear. I didn't know what had awakened me. Was it a noise or just the invisible terror roaring inside me? In that moment, I realized that the creature might still be pursuing me. I couldn't stop thinking about the last scene before I blacked out. The monster crashing through the underbrush, its roar piercing the air, and Sarah somewhere. I didn't know if she was still alive or had fallen in the desperate fight. The sun had begun to set, casting faint rays through the canopy. Every shadow seemed to conceal danger, but I had to keep moving. My legs felt heavy, each step pulling with 1,000 aches. As I tried to stand, I noticed a streak of dried blood on my sleeve. Not mine. It was from the creature. Sarah had hit it. And though it wasn't dead, I hoped it was at least severely injured. These thoughts quickly faded as I heard the snap of a twig not far away. A chill ran down my spine, and I instantly drew my gun, eyes fixed on the source of the sound. It could be anything. A deer, a wolf, or worse, the creature hunting us. But no, it was Sarah. She stumbled out from the undergrowth, her face gaunt and her sleeve torn. I sighed with relief, but this moment of joy was fleeting. "We need to leave now," she said, her voice hoarse and desperate. "It's still out there. It won't give up." We both knew time was running out. That monster wouldn't stop until one of us was dead. I didn't know if we could break free from this vicious cycle, but we had to try. I nodded, and we both started moving in the direction we hoped would lead us out of the forest. We dared not speak further, each breath a burden. Every step made our hearts pound in our ears. And then, just as I thought we might have escaped the danger, I heard it again. A deep growl from within the forest, carrying an unrelenting anger and hunger. Creature had returned. I didn't know how long I had run or how far I had gone. Finally, I collapsed, gasping, and unable to take another step. I waited for the creature to appear at any moment, expecting to feel its sharp claws tearing into me. Nothing happened. After a long while, only the wind and the distant calls of birds filled the silence. I was alive, though I didn't know for how much longer. Sarah and I found our way out of the wilderness. What awaited us was not the world we once knew. We tried to explain, to alert authorities, but what was the result? Have you ever tried to tell someone that there is a monster living in the woods? You get pitying looks and are referred to a psychologist. No one believes us, except for a few others who have faced such nightmares, who have looked into the abyss and seen it staring back. We've created a loose network, sharing information, warnings, and whispering about sightings in distant places. They call it urban legend, campfire tales. Perhaps it's safer for everyone that way. They don't know about the things that exist in the dark spaces between the trees, things cloaked in the skins of nightmares. They don't know Strider is real. I had always dreamed of owning a piece of land to call my own, a place where I could truly belong. I was tired of the hectic life, exhausted from being just a small cog in the enormous machine of society. After leaving the military, I decided to find a place isolated from the noisy world. I found a remote plot of land amid the vast wilderness of Montana. I built myself a small cabin, where I thought I could finally live life on my own terms, free and undisturbed. My name is Walker. First years here felt like a kind of simple paradise. I enjoyed outdoor activities like hunting, fishing, chopping wood, and experienced a peace I had never known in the noisy city. The long days passed quietly, with fresh air and tranquility I could never have imagined. But then, things began to change. The local residents started disappearing mysteriously. A hiker lost in the woods, few hunters who never returned to their vehicle. Rumors spread that it might be grizzly bears or packs of wolves becoming aggressive and attacking. I didn't believe those easy explanations. There was something wrong, an unsettling feeling that made my skin crawl every time I heard about these disappearances. I felt as if something unseen was lurking in the darkness, waiting for the moment to strike. That was when I found Harper. Harper was a seasoned man, living isolated in a cabin a few miles away. When I arrived, his cabin had been brutally searched. Blood splattered across the walls, and the remains of his body were scattered around the area. Whatever did this was definitely not an animal I was familiar with. Harper was a very brave man, knowing how to protect himself in this forest. But still, something had torn him to pieces. That was when the true fear began to take hold of me. I immediately reinforced my cabin, fortifying the doors and windows, always keeping my rifle loaded and ready. The nights became particularly terrifying. The forest seemed to hold its breath, thick silence enveloping everything, making the atmosphere tense and heavy. I felt an inexplicable weight in the air, a terrifying presence lurking around my cabin. I swore I heard footsteps circling the cabin, wheezing breaths, claws scraping against the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted. A few weeks later, while I was hunting deer in the forest, I encountered it. It was crouched by the stream, a colossal figure silhouetted in the dim light of dusk. It stood upright on two legs at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted fur. Its face made me shiver. Oh God! That face was elongated and twisted into a mocking semblance of a wolf, with long, sharp teeth. But its eyes, those eyes burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence, making me feel as if I was staring into the depths of hell. I backed away, dropping my backpack in fear, my heart pounding so hard that I swore whatever was out there could hear it. I heard it stand up fully behind me, a growl echoing through the dense foliage. I didn't stop until I was back at the cabin, collapsing inside and slamming the door shut. In the following days, it relentlessly surrounded me, battering the walls, tearing at my roof. Its heavy breathing was a constant torment. I barely ate, jumping at every shadow, the images of Harper's remains and the creature's burning eyes haunting my mind. I began talking to myself, trying to drown out the scratching sounds and the hoarse growls that seemed to come from every direction. One morning, the sound suddenly stopped. I waited for hours, my gun trembling in my hands, but nothing happened. Cautiously, I ventured outside, the ground around the cabin trampled and scratched, a heavy stench of decay hanging in the air. The creature was gone, but the horror remained. I knew it would come back. I couldn't stay any longer. I hurriedly threw whatever I could into the truck and drove away, not stopping until I reached the outskirts of an unnamed city, finding a small, grimy apartment where the lights never went out and the traffic noise drowned out the silence that had once terrified me. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still imagine I hear its hoarse breathing on the other side of the thin walls. I picture its glowing eyes fixed on my window, the stench of its body polluting the city air. I sleep with a hunting knife under my pillow and startle at every creak of the old building. Montana, the forest, and the simple life I once longed for now feel like a distant dream, tainted by the memory of those glowing eyes and Harper's grisly end. The people there spoke of stories, whispers about a creature called the Wendigo, a starving spirit from ancient lore. I no longer know what to believe, only that somewhere in the vast, untamed wilderness, an inhuman entity roams the lonely places, and some fools like us happen to cross its path. I hope others will never have to face the terror I experienced. There are things no one should ever witness, and that creature, with its glowing eyes and its presence, is one of those things. The stories, the legends of the Wendigo might just be rumors, but to me, they are a horrific truth from which I cannot escape. I will live with that fear for the rest of my life, and the memories of the creature and the terrible things it did will forever haunt my mind.